Welcome to another episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. I am your host, Graham Hall, joined once again by my co-host, Zach Goodall, and we are back to preview, break down, and predict Florida's upcoming matchup, Saturday's 7 p.m. Eastern battle in College Station at Kyle Field against the undefeated Texas A&M Aggies, an opponent Florida is quite familiar with. These teams have played more than a handful of times in the past half decade, it seems. It feels like almost an annual occurrence at this point. Let's go back to last year because we've talked so much about the start that the Florida Gators had, how undesirable it was. Started 1-2 last season, got a win over an FCS opponent in Samford, but lost their first two games to Miami and then to Texas A&M, 33-20 last year in what was the collegiate debut, first ever start for quarterback Marcel Reed. And in the time since, Reed has, in my opinion, been one of the SEC's more productive quarterbacks. He almost feels like a forgotten name a lot of the time, feels like he's flown under the radar, but has been extremely capable, has been able to complete nearly 60% of his passes, does damage on the ground. Last season, he had nearly 550 rushing yards. Doesn't quite have that total so far this season, but certainly is a weapon in the run game for the Aggies. They have an impressive offensive line, and they're coming off a game where they had 299 rushing yards against Mississippi State. So certainly a potent ground game that is going to cause problems for Florida and another formidable foe for Florida to face. Let's dive right into it. Marcel Reed, the last year that he has had, Florida's history struggling with dynamic quarterbacks. Zach, just in your opinion, how much of a challenging matchup is this for a Florida defense that has looked really, really good so far this season and just established their pass rush for the first time this year? They're coming off a 35 pressure, 8 tackle for loss, and 8 quarterback hurries, and 6 sacks performance against the Texas Longhorns, who were number 9 in the country when they came to Gainesville last week, and have now dropped out of the rankings. Zach, what kind of challenge, in your opinion, do you think Marcel Reed poses for this Florida defense on Saturday?
I think he poses an immense challenge. And obviously, Florida fans got a taste of that last year when he made his starting debut, that is, against Florida in week 3 here in the Swamp. And he was able to deal with the crowd noise pretty well. He put up a very effective outing. And I agree with you that he's only gotten better. For Florida, you look at this pass game, the pass rush breakout party, like we talked about the other day, fantastic. And they need to do something similar against Marcel Reed to be effective and knock him off his spot as a passer. But he's more of a dynamic runner than Arch Manning, who was able to do a lot with his legs. Granted, that largely came off of scrambles when he was under pressure and had to bail on passing to go and make yards with his feet. Marcel Reed's more of a design rusher. He can scramble, obviously. He's quite good at it, but they'll incorporate him into their run game intentionally. And I think he's a more dynamic athlete than Arch Manning. And this is the type of quarterback we've seen even while Florida's defense has improved over the past however many games now. We want to call it 10, going back to last year or so. They've still struggled, point being Arch Manning on scrambles, with a quarterback who can make things happen with his feet, especially if they pair the ability to throw pretty well or accurate and poised in the pocket. He's a true dual threat. This is something that not only is the pass rush going to have to get after it, but they're going to have to remain, strong gap integrity, remain in their rush lanes, not get pulled out too much, because he can very easily just make something shake with his feet and tear you apart that way. And again, the quarterback designed run game as well is something that they're going to have to incorporate. We saw a good bit of spying against Texas, Miles Graham in particular, but also occasionally Jaden Robinson and Aaron Giles. I think they're going to have to really not blitz. They blitzed more. They sent 5 more against Texas than they often do. I think they're going to have to rely on their front 4 largely getting the job done, or the simulated pressures with only 4, to make sure they still keep 6 in coverage and maybe have a player consistently spying Reed in order to make sure that he can't damage them with his feet.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued to see how they use Marcel Reed as a runner, whether most of his damage is, like you said, similar to Arch Manning, where he escapes the pocket. And to use Billy Napier's word, the unannounced, unexpected plays that come out of the passing game where the pocket breaks down and the quarterback can take off and run. And if you aren't spying him and don't play contain against him, can certainly do damage against him. It's worth noting that for the Aggies, they have to protect Reed as much as possible, and that could limit the design quarterback runs, because you go back to really the last 5 years, a similar situation in a sense to Florida, where Texas A&M has had injuries to their starting quarterback for each of the last 4 or 5 years. I got to go back and look, but it certainly has been since 2021 where they've had a starting quarterback go down in a contest. And the way the team is playing around the quarterback right now, protecting Marcel Reed, is an absolute point of importance for this Aggies offense. And certainly I mentioned the ground game, nearly 300 yards against Mississippi State. They're going to be, like you said, gap integrity is going to be key in this game. Limiting the lanes for Moss and the rest of the backs to run through is going to be key. And the stable of weapons around Marcel Reed, certainly guys you have to account for. You look at Mario Craver, he leads all SEC receivers in receiving yards coming into this game. He has nearly half of Marcel Reed's passing yards. I think he's at 557 or something like that. And Reed has nearly, 1,250 yards of offense, passing yards coming into this game. So certainly someone to account for. The transfer they added from NC State as well, KC, I'm probably going to butcher his last name, Concepcion. I probably butchered that. I apologize.
I think that's about as close. You probably did a better job than I would have.
Hey, I had to take a stab at it. You got to at least try here. Hopefully, if someone can correct me out there, I'll learn to say it the right way. So he certainly has talent around him. And Florida is once again going to have to get an impressive performance out of a defense that, like we mentioned, has been extremely capable. That front four, the defensive front, has been really, really good all season long, even though they battled through injuries to George Gums, and LJ McCray still is away from the field right now. Cameron James was really effective in my mind against the Longhorns on Saturday, continually got pressure, played to his assignment, just did a really sound job there. Jaden Woods is coming off another 30-plus snap performance, had a really, really good game on Saturday as well. Tyreek Sapp, even though he played the fewest snaps of any of the edge group for Florida, just continues to be an impact player. He graded out number 1 among all edge rushers in run defense against the Longhorns. So that bodes well for Florida against this very potent backfield that the Aggies have. And we also got to mention Brian Taylor Jr. had the best performance of his collegiate career on Saturday. A former JUCO guy, from the Houston area, went to Blinn College, if that sounds familiar. It's famously where Cam Newton went before he landed at Auburn, a very well-renowned JUCO establishment. But he started out at edge, moved inside about a year and a half ago, and since then has continually blossomed and has filled out his weight and looked really, really good along the interior for Florida. So even though the Gators are missing guys like Caleb Banks and Brendan Bett has been banged up, this Florida front has been really, really good. And that whole front seven as a whole is going to have to be extremely sound once again on Saturday against this Texas A&M offense. Looking at Texas A&M's defense, a bunch of challenges that they present as well. A really impressive front. This is going to sound a little bit obvious, but to me, this feels like a game that is going to be dictated by who can win the battle of the trenches, who can protect their quarterback the most, and defensively, who can get the most pressure here. Florida's coming off a game where they didn't allow a sack for DJ Lagway, and they only allowed 3 tackles for loss. You could make a case that was their best performance of the year against a really, really good Texas defense. They're going to have to do it again on Saturday. They face Cassius Howell, who already has 7 sacks so far this season. He leads all SEC players in sacks. I believe he's tied for number 1 in the nation among all FBS players in sacks. Torian York has been really good for them as well at linebacker. He leads them in tackles. This is a defense that Florida is pretty well acquainted with. The guys I just mentioned, familiar faces, but also on the coaching staff. This is a little bit of an intriguing battle. Sean Spencer, Florida's former defensive line coach, is now in his 2nd season with the Aggies, and Jay Bateman is as well, Florida's inside linebackers coach back in 2023, now still in his 2nd season with the Aggies as well. So familiar faces on both sides of the ball. TJ Searcy is part of that defensive front as well. I know that's a name familiar to Florida fans. He entered the portal and transferred to the Aggies in the offseason. Scooby Williams will miss this game, his 2nd straight game. Another familiar face for a lot of Florida fans, but a lot of familiarity between these two teams. Looking at their defensive front, Zach, what challenges do you expect the Aggies to pose for the Gators on Saturday? How important is it going to be to continue to play well along the line of scrimmage for the Florida Gators?
Yeah, I think they're going to try and turn up the heat. And obviously you can do that when you've got a player like Cassius Howell. I mean, he's got 20 pressures on the year. it's crazy. Like you mentioned, the 7 sacks, also 8 tackles for loss. He only has 13 tackles on the year. So more than half are plays that he's making in the backfield. I mean, his effectiveness when he gets toward the quarterback or even the running back, if he's in the backfield, there's a strong chance he's going to bring him down. And when you look at the Texas game, I believe they only generated the Longhorns 6 pressures throughout the game. DJ Lagway largely operated in a clean pocket and was probably, if not definitely, the best performance by Florida's offensive line this season. Well, Texas A&M, at least seemingly on paper and from what we can tell, has a more productive pass rush so far than what Texas has put on tape, even with Colin Simmons. Like they just did not live up to the billing that they had entering the season, that being Texas. Texas A&M has. And I would think that considering the struggles DJ Lagway has had this season, even after he came off a clean, for the most part, very clean, arguably one of the best games of his career, I'm sure there's some thought that they, looking at Texas's defense, that maybe that was, I'm not trying to say it was an anomaly, but maybe on their end, they see it as there's a potential for him to take a step back against a much better front. And therefore I could see Texas just trying to go after him, maybe sending 5 more often than not, daring Florida's receivers to have to break open a little more deep and post some deep threats. And obviously Dallas Wilson clearly helped Florida in that respect, but it's going to take more than one player against a much better defense for the deep passing game to consistently be a factor. If they're able to send pressure and able to rattle DJ Lagway, then all of a sudden we could be looking at a situation not too dissimilar from maybe some of Lagway's previous performances. It's going to be, from what I would imagine, a much tougher test compared to this past week. And then you factor in, of course, it being at Texas A&M too. At Kyle Field, it's going to be quite a challenge, just kind of all around.
Yeah, they're going to be 108,000 screaming fans there at Kyle Field. Go back to the last time Florida played at Texas A&M. I believe that was a noon game, so it wasn't nearly as ruckus of an environment there. Certainly the Aggies were dealing with some of their issues of their own, but that's in the past. This team looks really, really good. Billy Napier was effusive in his praise of the Aggies and head coach Mike Elko, the job he's done now in his second year with the program. Really good in all 3 phases. I mentioned those guys in Craver and KC. Those are number 2 and number 3 in all-purpose yards among SEC players. KC already has a punt return touchdown as well. So you're going to have to account for their weapons in multiple phases of this game. Florida has mentioned briefly that they're looking for additional sources of motivation recently, is what I'll call it. Go back to the bye week. Billy Napier said something really interesting in my mind. He acknowledged really for the first time that the Gators, sitting at 1-3, should pay attention to the outside noise, which really flies in the face of everything that he said in recent weeks, really throughout his time in Gainesville. They've said continuously that they don't pay attention to the outside noise. It's what goes on inside the building, not what people have to say online. Remember, he had that infamous basements in Central Florida comment when he was talking about the outside narrative. He wanted them to embrace the narrative, the criticism, everything. They should know who they are, is what he said before the Texas game. And if that impacted Florida heading into that contest against Texas, it certainly is something that the Gators are going to want to continue to embrace, because the noise around Billy Napier continues to be, I'll be quite honest, deafening at times, where people are already sitting here saying there's no way that they can get it done the rest of the way. The gauntlet is too difficult. They're not going to run the table. They're motivated to prove people wrong, and it starts with this game on Saturday. Got to go 1-0 every single week. Billy Napier said on Monday that this game has a chance to be a multiplier for Florida, where they can pick up a second straight top 10 win. This would be the highest ranked win in the Billy Napier era if they can down the number 5 team in the country. And he's hopeful that they're not going to avoid a letdown with everything they have to play for. It's also interesting, I mentioned Brian Taylor Jr. heading back to his home state of Texas. This is a homecoming game of sorts for DJ Lagway. He's grew up less than an hour away in Willis, Texas. Texas A&M was heavily involved in his recruitment, did everything they could to try and flip him at the end when he was committed to Florida. He ends up coming to the Gators, but Texas A&M was a program that was relentless in their pursuit. You know that Lagway and his family are going to have a ton of friends and family in the stands there. So going back to his home state, beating the team that he almost, he was heavily recruited by. I'm not going to say almost necessarily, because we don't know how close it really was. Billy Napier kind of said on Wednesday's teleconference that it was a little hearsay, a lot of behind the scenes stuff was maybe inaccurately portrayed. But this is a potential another source of motivation for DJ Lagway, knowing that he's going to be playing back in his home state in front of friends and family. And he also has a lot of relationships with guys on the Texas A&M team. Torian York and him have a relationship that goes back to high school, some very competitive battles. So certainly if that can impact Florida's offense, the Gators are going to hope to use that as a source of motivation, even though this team sitting at 2-3, a chance to get to 500, get another ranked win, should not lack for any motivation whatsoever. But what they are lacking is a fully healthy roster. And I really kind of hate sometimes harping on injuries, but you've seen it on social media. The availability report came out Wednesday night, and the Gators had 13 players on there. Now, some of them weren't surprises. Caleb Banks, LJ McCray, Dijon Johnson, Aaron Gates. We know they're dealing with injuries. Trayon Webb still is out after having that procedure on his hamstring in fall camp. But the notable names were the ones who were listed as questionable, from Roderick Kearney, Moise Tunkara, Aiden Mizell. That's a guy who has been just hindered by injuries really throughout his time. He missed the LSU game, or not the LSU game, the Miami game, was able to make an impact last week, looked really, really good, but now he finds himself back on the availability report listed as questionable. This is a Florida team that is certainly banged up. And while that does seem a little bit jarring to some people, in my opinion, it does make sense. Florida has talked about how competitive practices are, and they faced 3 straight physical, talented, top teams in the country, 3 top 10 ranked teams at the time when Florida faced them. So it does make sense from a physicality standpoint, but Florida is certainly going to be without some key players. On the offensive line, they're missing 2 of their top backups in Devin Manuel and Roger Kearney. I guess I shouldn't say missing because they are questionable, and we'll have to see 90 minutes before kickoff on Saturday if they're able to take the field. But this is a Florida team that is banged up. In your opinion, Zach, how significant is it that Florida could be without several key players heading into this game? And what does that mean for guys like Dallas Wilson, Vernell Brown, the rest of the talented backups on the offensive line? And I should also mention Duke Clark was Florida's number 2 running back heading into the Texas game. He rushed 9 times for 38 yards, but he exited in the second half, did not return, and now he is listed as out on the availability report. Jacoby Jackson, Florida's backup running back for much of the season, is listed as questionable. This could be an opportunity for Katie Daniels, a fellow sophomore, along with Jaden Baugh, who's coming off a career performance, 27 rushes, 109 rushing yards, both career highs for him. This could be an opportunity for Katie Daniels to establish himself and be productive. With all that said, how significant in your mind is the injuries that Florida is dealing with, knowing that their depth and some of their starters have once again taken a hit and could be out for this contest on Saturday?
Extremely. I mean, the way I see it, and I know that our message board loves to talk about it, Florida just seems like a more injured team than most of its competition. I mean, you look at this report for Texas A&M, they've only got 2 players on there, 1 out, 1 questionable. Florida has 13 when all is said and done. It's and I mean, Texas last week too. Texas had a few guys listed as probable. They all got pulled off because they were able to play. And I think it was only 2 players didn't end up going, and CJ Baxter and Malik Muhammad. I don't want to point fingers or suggest that. I mean, to your point, maybe it is because of the 3 top 10 matchups and that the physicality has been there. Maybe in practice they are hitting a lot, maybe too much. Whatever the case may be, Florida, this has become kind of routine, even going back to earlier in the season. And we, didn't have injury reports for the Miami game and for the Long Island game or the USF game even. But I mean, we were paying attention to it in fall camp. How many guys were either dinged up day to day, as the team would often call it. And some of those injuries ended up lasting into the season. So to me, it's almost like in this game, obviously, the injuries are stacked against them going up against a pretty healthy and very good Texas A&M team. But it's a bigger picture issue at this point. Florida's, and I'm sure they would brush this aside, say it's normal for there to be injuries in football. Like, yes, of course. But I mean, I've not looked through. So I'm just kind of speaking my opinion here, but it feels like to me that Florida is kind of routinely one of the most injured teams in the SEC, and that's just not a winning formula. Like, they're going to have to rely on their depth, and they've got promising depth. You mentioned like Dallas Wilson. He only played, even though he started, only played 16 passing snaps against Texas, and he obviously made the most of them. You're going to have him out there for much more, and he's only in his second game of the season because he missed the first 4 games with a foot injury. So you're going to be seeing that across the board. You mentioned with potentially being without Jacoby Jackson and certainly being without Duke Clark. That means Florida's on its 4th running back behind or number 4 running back stepping into the number 2 role behind Jaden Baugh. And you can really, find different spots like that across the entire roster at this point. To me, again, like, big for this game, bigger picture issue at this point that we should honestly probably ask about at some point. I mean, it's kind of baffling how often Florida deals with injuries.
Yeah, to be quite frank, last year we asked Billy Napier about it. When you were covering the Jags, we asked about the injuries because this is not a first-year thing that Florida is dealing with. I think a lot of the gripes that fans have is that you can go back last year and Florida was missing significant players on the roster due to injury that were either on the depth chart. You had double-digit names. And I was told a couple things, that some of those players who aren't expected to return for the season, the belief was that they would not be included on the availability report as they were listed on a medically exempt list. Now, guys like Caleb Banks and Dijon Johnson, 2 players that, to be quite frank, we know Johnson's not going to run this year, but the odds aren't in Banks' favor, considering he's on a scooter in a cast right now. Should those players even be included on the availability report? I don't know. But then on the flip side of it is you could make the case that there are some guys dealing with injuries or extended recoveries who aren't on there. The most notable one in my mind is Grayson Howard. You wrote about him over at Swamp247 earlier this week. He was a key player for Florida last year, started 9 games, got injured at the end of the year, missed much of spring camp, missed some of fall camp, but he didn't play against Texas. He's appeared in 3 games so far this season. And Billy Napier said on Monday that he hasn't been able to return to the level of play that he's capable of, that he's still impacted by his offseason recovery. And he made the comparison for Howard that it's similar to DJ Lagway in a sense. So you could make the case that Florida has even more injuries or recoveries that they're dealing with than are even on the availability report. So it certainly is going to be a topic of discussion, whether it's attributed to the physical games Florida's played, or maybe an area within the strength and conditioning recovery program that maybe something Florida wants to assess. I don't know. We haven't heard. But what we do know is that Florida is dealing with double-digit injured, questionable, or out players heading into this game. And that alone is significant. It is a factor in this matchup. You never like writing or reporting on injuries, but they do matter in a game like this, especially when you're missing a starting cornerback, a starting wide receiver, multiple guys along your defensive front, your starting linebacker from last season. Those are fair questions to ask, and they certainly are impactful because if someone else goes down, you're looking at a freshman or someone who is a second or third string guy heading into the year, and being able to have the same level of performance if you have to turn to an inexperienced face is always a difficult ask. And it's an aspect of games that we always evaluate and talk about. So it is notable. Now, with all that said, we're going to get to the part where we predict how this matchup shakes out. Now, you can see our written predictions Friday morning over at Swamp247. We're recording this podcast Thursday morning here. So we've got just the one availability report. We'll get one tonight as well. We'll get one Friday night, and we'll get one 90 minutes before kickoff. So maybe Florida's injury list could get a little bit shorter if some questionable guys return to practice, or it could get longer, as it did last week when Moise Tinkara was a late addition to the availability report. Zach, in your opinion, how do you see this one shaking out? What do you think are the keys to the game for both the Aggies and the Gators? And give me your score prediction.
I mean, kind of like what I had referenced the other day on the pod. It's like I'm not willing to just brush aside all of the problems from Florida's past because of the one game. So I'm still pessimistic about their chances in this one. I'm going to take Texas A&M 27-17. And that still technically is an improved offensive performance for Florida when you compare it to their 2 road games prior when the offense was totally anemic. 17 points, while not great, it is another, I guess, technical step in the right direction in that sense. But I think you point to the health of both teams. I think that's a critical factor. You point to Kyle Field, 108 that they're going to have there at night, especially when Florida went in there and won a few years ago. It was technically an 11 a.m. kickoff, noon for obviously fans watching on the East Coast. And this Texas A&M team, it really just doesn't have a ton of question marks. Florida still does. And I don't think that one great performance as it was will absolve all of those. You got to see it stack. You got to, as Billy Napier coined it, multiplying it. And I'm just not comfortable with that at this point. Maybe I'll be wrong. I mean, I certainly was wrong last week, but I don't think anyone that was covering Florida intently to start the season was confident that Florida was going to go in and beat Texas. So I don't feel too bad about it. Maybe I will be again this time, but I just think that the odds are stacked against Florida at this point. They would have to really, really rattle Marcel Reed and do a great job with gap integrity and contain to not allow him to pose the threat as a rusher. And again, to say what I said earlier, they struggled with that with Arch Manning. It was enough, but Texas, again, think what you will of Texas, but it was enough to really impact that offense. I'm just not sure that Florida's defense, as good as it is, based on the struggles they've had with these true dual threats in the past, is up for the challenge of doing that against Marcel Reed in his own home turf. So, yeah, I'm taking Texas A&M 27-17.
Yeah, I'm in a similar boat as you, and maybe everything I said about the outside noise, Florida will see all the predictions out there, including ours, and use it as
they're listening to the show.
Yeah, I mean, if that happens, you're welcome, Florida fans. But I'm in a similar boat as you. I do think it's going to be a little bit closer of a game than you think. I went 24-20 Texas A&M on Saturday. All the factors you just mentioned, from Marcel Reed, the weapons he has at the skill positions around him, an impressive offensive line, a really good defensive front, capable players in the secondary. This just seems like a very daunting challenge for Florida to overcome. And then you factor in the home field advantage. You factor in that this Aggies team, you can make the case that they're in the driver's seat for not just making the college football playoff, but making the SEC championship game. And I think that they have so much to play for. Yeah, Florida's back is against the wall. And to be quite frank, we know what Billy Napier's teams can do when everyone counts them out. Go back to last season, just the progress they showed down the stretch when they sat here at 1-2 and everyone was saying, hey, this is the end of the Napier era. This team has no more fight in it. And they stayed together. They didn't splinter. Maybe that'll be a factor in this game, but I think this is going to be a close game. I think Florida's going to have its chances. I think Lagway's going to have another good performance. I do think that Texas A&M is going to come away with a takeaway. And I think that just Florida's history of struggling against dual threat quarterbacks like Marcel Reed and the unannounced plays that we talked about are going to make this such a difficult challenge for Florida. I think they'll have their chances again down the stretch, but I think Florida comes up just short. I went 24-20. And if that happens, I already mentioned the noise around Billy Napier being deafening heading into homecoming against Mississippi State on October 18th. That's going to be filled with questions about his future once again, even though we're sitting here Thursday morning and people are still wondering how much longer Napier is going to last. It would take pretty much running the table, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of outsiders out there, to see him return for a fifth season in Gainesville. So this is going to be a very impactful matchup for his future. It could give him a little breathing room, or it could let the walls close in a little bit more on Florida's head coach, who has simply just not had the results that he's looking for so far in Gainesville. Now, in midway through his fourth season in Gainesville, needs a win in this game to get to 500. And as Florida fans know, that is just not up to the level of expectation that this program has, that they have, and quite frankly, that a program with as much pride and dedicated fan base deserves. So this is going to be a really intriguing matchup. I'm looking to get out there to College Station. I'll be flying out there on Friday, getting in Saturday morning before heading to the game. I'm really looking forward to seeing an intense atmosphere and seeing how this one unfolds under the lights at Kyle Field. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Swamp247 Podcast. We'll be back next week to break down Florida's matchup with Texas A&M, as well as preview later in the week Florida's homecoming battle against a Mississippi State team that looks much better than people thought ahead of the season. But for now, that's going to do it for us. For Zach Goodall, I'm Graham Hall, and we'll see you next time.